Fireside chat time. What's going on with the college football playoff? I know you saw the headlines, and if you didn't, a couple of pendulums swung in our sport yesterday. Okay, the first one sounded like this. Pete Thamel, ESPN. According to sources, the idea of a 14-team college football playoff was discussed by the management committee at meetings in the Dallas area today. If that happened, it would begin in 2026. Nothing is imminent, but it's a significant idea that was discussed. You may be thinking to yourself, how can they expand to 14? We haven't even had a season of 12. The answer is these people were disingenuous about 12 all along. They were never stopping at 12. If you watch this show, that's not breaking news to you because it was so easy to see. Ray Charles could have written an entire song about it. So we're past that already. There's no freak out. We're not shocked by that. But another pendulum swung yesterday. I think a lot of you participated in this one. You know that some of you and I, have had our differences in the past about what's best for college football. Should we have the BCS model? Should we have a 12-team playoff, a 4-team playoff? Should we have the BCS computers seed the playoff instead of having a committee? All different sorts of odds and ends, and everyone's got their own take on it. But what I noticed yesterday for the first time is massive amounts of people who I know in the past have been pro-expansion had their eyes open. You realized what's happened. You realized these people had this as the end goal all along. They gaslit you. They got you to go along with it. And then yesterday, all of a sudden, this headline comes out, and a lot of the expansionist crowd's like, hold on, that's not what we signed up for. You're absolutely right. It's not what you signed up for. But it is what you signed up for. You just didn't know it. They pulled the bait and switch on you. You know, you signed up for something, and unbeknownst to you, there was a little box checked down in the far corner, and you signed up for emails and marketing that you never wanted. I didn't sign up to be on this email list. Yeah, you did. You just didn't read the fine print. So here's what I wanted to do tonight. Not an I told you so deal whatsoever. I realized that over the span of 12 months, we add hundreds of thousands of people to this show. And so a lot of people are new here, and they don't know why we feel the way we feel or why I feel the way I feel. There are a lot of folks who want college football playoff expansion out there. You feel however you want to. I've felt a certain type of way about it for a long time. But I notice in the back and forth I have, in a lot of cases, a lot of you are confused as to how someone could feel the way I feel. Why in the world would you push back against this stuff? Well, I think the answer to that is also the answer in which you can understand a lot of what's going on here. Like, why would these people be of this mentality? Why can't these people leave well enough alone? When is enough enough? You've probably found yourself asking a lot of those questions lately, even if you are pro-expansion, because I know good and well a lot of you out there wanted a 6-team model or an 8-team model, or maybe some of you wanted 12 teams, but even you're looking and saying, 14, 16, like, where does it stop? It doesn't. That's the whole point. It doesn't, and some of us kind of had that feeling from the get-go, but forget about that, okay? So let me tell you why I feel the way I feel, and you can chime in, disagree with me, or add on to it, whatever you want to do, but I wanted to go fireside chat here because I wanted to explain to you where my mind's at on this. I was against college football playoff expansion because I thought what's happening now was probably the most likely path. Candidly, if you told me that we would expand this thing to 6 or even 8 teams and stop there, I would have been okay with it. But I knew there was no world where these folks would expand this to 6 or 8, period. And even if they did, there was no world where they expanded it to 6 or 8 and then stopped and threw the key in a lake, never to be found again. They were always going well past that because these people don't have the greater good of college football in their mind. It's not the interests that they're serving. They're serving their own interests. Okay, that sucks, but it is what it is. That's what we have to deal with right now. The reason I feel the way I feel, the reason I'm totally fine leaving it even pre-playoff in the BCS model is because my love of college football has never been rooted in the postseason. And that's different than Major League Baseball. That's different than the way I watch the NFL, where I'm worried about playoff and Super Bowl. College football is one of one for me. There's nothing else out there like it. There's no comp. There's no parallel. Therefore, there is no other sport I look at and say college football needs to be more like that right there. College football was fine. It was fine the way it was. And a lot of folks enjoyed Saturdays just because they were Saturdays. And whether you had Georgia Tech facing North Carolina, both teams 3 or 4 losses already on the resume, its meaning did not derive from whether or not there were postseason implications on the line. It was just that we had a ton of teams, like over 100 teams, playing a sport. We kind of recognized most of them aren't capable of winning a national championship. It's ludicrous to tie their meaning and their worth to access to winning that championship because there are vast gulfs in resources, team to team, program to program. And so once upon a time, logic prevailed, more or less. And, if you were a Louisiana Tech fan, you did not pretend to be playing the same sport as the University of Alabama. Then someone came along and changed all of it. And if you're new to this sport, you may be 15 years old, and a lot of this happened before you were able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Let me explain to you a very, very quick snapshot of what's happened, because I got papers all over the place. You don't really need to be well-read on this because it's happened in other sectors of society long before it happened in college football. Here's basically all you need to know. A bunch of people who really didn't care about college football so much, they more cared about deepening their pockets. A bunch of people came along and they saw college football. And college football was really, really good, but it was good for fans. It wasn't necessarily fully leveraged from a profit maximization standpoint, and they realized, well, we could make a whole lot more money on this thing. And so being absent of central leadership, no one stopped them. They just walked in the door, and they built themselves an ATM, but they called it a playoff. See, they built the ATM so it would print money, but they didn't call it an ATM. They called it a college football playoff. Part 2 came when they gaslit everyone into thinking it was needed. And they would point things out like 2004. That's an imperfect season. We had an undefeated team be left out. How could we ever continue this sport? Lack of a playoff's an existential threat. And they talked about the betterment of the game, the best interest of college football. They talked about the best interest of a sport they couldn't care less about. They cared about leveraging it. They didn't care about the sport itself. And then when the playoff comes around, the next order of business was they used mass marketing to redefine what meaning actually was. Once upon a time, meaning was, I'm waking up on Saturday and my team's playing your team and it's college football. It's great, but all of a sudden that wasn't good enough anymore. What worked for a million years wasn't good enough. All of a sudden, it's about who's in. Remember that marketing campaign? It got thrown in your face. It got sprayed in your face like a fire hose. Every single waking hour of every day that you watched programming, it was about who's in the playoff. That's what meaning is, after all. If you're playing a game in early November and you're out of the playoff race, that's a meaningless game. Only in about the past decade have we started to popularize phrases like meaningless game in college football. You ever wonder why that's only popped up in the last decade? You ever wonder why bowl opt-outs only really popped up in the last decade? It's not because the NFL all of a sudden started paying millions of dollars, therefore guys didn't want to risk their draft status. NFL was paying big money in 2005 just as much as they were in 2015. The difference is the adults in the room told the kids on the field, it's not a playoff game, it's meaningless. And how dare those kids? They listened to the adults. They get accused of not doing it all the time. They listened to the adults. And so then all of a sudden, you realize you got a problem. And the same group that had the flamethrower in their hand and set the forest on fire put the flamethrower down, and then they went and bought a fire truck and drove it right up and had the audacity to tell you, we're here to put out the fire. We need to expand the playoff more because that's how games will get meaning. Now, games had meaning forever before that crowd came along. But then all of a sudden, the games don't have meaning anymore. Why are these games not meaningful in November? Well, I know. We'll create more of what caused the problem. And lo and behold, people went along with it again. And folks like me who pushed back on it were called Neanderthals, knuckle draggers. Like, how can you resist change? How could you say no to more football, Josh? I love football. Love it. I love money. I don't love it. I love the idea of having a lot of it. But at the same time, I know what happens to the money I do have if you start printing it endlessly. It's actually happening right now, and it devalues that currency. Read up on it, kids. It's actually a pretty big problem. Therefore, loving something does not automatically mean you want as much of it as you can possibly have because of basic rules of scarcity. Well, these people don't teach that in their courses, but all of a sudden, now we sit here, and the same crowd that brought you from 2 to 4, and now from 4 to 12, and maybe we never have 12 because we may go to 14 or 16, they're telling you, don't worry, this will address the problem. The games will have meaning now. The games had meaning. The games had meaning. It's just that a bunch of dudes in suits came along, and they convinced you that access to a playoff was like college football's version of oxygen. And if you don't have access to that, if you're not in the chase for the playoff, your games have no meaning. That playoff was built by men. That playoff was created very recently. The things that make college football great have been around decades and decades and decades. And you could call it man-made, but really it was created by culture. It was created by years and years and years of doing something and enjoying something and sharing something communally. And then it saddens me that you let a group of clowns come in wearing suits, so you know they must be legit, and we just allowed them to redefine it. That's kind of the sad part. So if you want to know why I push back on expansion, if you want to know why I hardlined my stance at the outset, if you want to know why I didn't want to compromise and just give a little, it's because there was never giving a little. In this equation, there was either winning or you let go of the rope completely. So I'm very respectful about the pushback and the counter arguments that I get on some of this, because there's a lot of whataboutism. And the what about that I get a lot is, wow, so you're saying you don't want an expanded playoff. You're absolutely right. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so are you saying that you're okay with like a 2004 Auburn being left out? And I'm saying, yeah, I am. I don't like that it happened. I'm not claiming there's a perfect system out there. The BCS system wasn't perfect. The 4-team system is not perfect. What I'm looking for is I am looking for the system that most maximizes relevance on the regular season and least attaches the need for postseason inclusion as a basis for that meaning in the regular season. And so there's going to be instances, 2004, Auburn gets screwed out of a spot to play for a championship. Sucks. It was still the best system. In my mind. 2000, what was it, Jesse? Like 14, you had the whole TCU Baylor thing, and neither of them make the playoff. It's tough. It's tough. And if I'm a Baylor fan and I'm a TCU fan, I'm not interested in listening to this right now. If I'm an 04 Auburn, I'm not interested in listening to this. Florida State last year, I'm not interested in listening to this. It's almost better, if you're talking about the greater good of the sport, that you're not aligned with a team. Like, I'm not a fan of a team, so I can sit here and look at the sport holistically. Frankly, it's one of the things that I think bad actors in the room have been able to successfully use against people is emotion, because they know you're attached. You're a fanatic of a team. And that's great. You should be. But they also know that it's as easy as telling you, Penn State fan, it's as easy as telling you, forget what they're saying about meaning in the regular season. Under this model, your team, Penn State, you'll have a percentage-wise much better shot at a playoff spot. Now, what do you say about that? Well, a lot of people who don't know how to think deeper than the top layer of soil say, I'm in. Where do I sign up? A playoff spot. That would be great. Never considering what the collateral damage is to the sport, not the team, Penn State, but the sport overall. Like I said, college football is one of one. I don't care how they do it in the NFL. This is not the NFL. They have trades in the NFL. Do you want Oklahoma State trading their linebacker to Clemson 2 weeks before the season starts? Do you ever think this through when you say, well, the NFL does it. Why doesn't college football do it? They're not the same thing. The shape of the ball, the dimensions of the field are about the only things that are the same between those two. Well, March Madness works fine. It sure does. What was your favorite college basketball game you watched in the last week? For 95% of you, the answer is incomplete. You're not watching now because you know right now is irrelevant because you don't have to watch until March or April. So I'm not interested in duplicating a formula that has rendered its own regular season irrelevant for the sake of a postseason. We've got that. If you want that, you've got it. It's called college basketball. And I'm totally fine with it. I'm enamored with March Madness and the NCAA tournament. but I don't want college football turning into that. So in closing, let me say this, because I will be accused of certain things after having done this segment. This is not the end of the world. It's not cataclysmic. It's not like DEFCON 10 or anything like that. College football will go on. College football will be fine. But every change that's made to this sport is either for the betterment or for the detriment or in the middle. And I think this is far left of middle, and it is detrimental to the overall health of the sport. Not fatal, not terminal, but it's not good for the sport. And I don't like it at all. And I think that maybe in some ways there's a little bit of too little too late that comes in here. I do at least I don't take any solace at all in people seeing that some of us were right about this, because it doesn't matter. It's not like all of a sudden they hit the rewind button once a certain amount of people say, I guess you were right after all. No. In fact, I think we let off a lot of segments we did about this by saying, I think I'm going to be right about this, but I hope I'm wrong, because if I am right, there will be no pleasure in being right, because at that point, something bad's happened. Well, looks like something bad may be in the process of happening. Not bad across the board. Some of you, smaller and smaller in number by the day, but some of you will still even like this because, hey, man, meaning, that playoff, that is what we get meaning from this day and age.